as an Arab leader of significance. And during the many battles, including the battle in 1973, when he fights with Israel, and that is when the Golan Heights are taken by Israel, which is still in the Israeli hands to date. Assad enters into a phase of being a pan-Arabist in the sense that...
Hey guys, as you're watching this video, our vision is to reach 500,000 subscribers. Hit the subscribe button, join membership to support our channel, join Patreon and PayPal. All the links are in the description. Do that to stand with us for this beautiful cause of One Africa right now. We do not forget to sign up for the petition. The link is down below. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Syria is an interesting country and an old civilization whose history is as checkered as it is interesting. And the world has now come to know about Syria again, following the removal of the Assad regime on the 7th day of December, the year 2024. And in order to understand the history of Syria, or the status of Syria as it is important to go back to history a little, but not too deep into history. Syria became prominent in the 1940s, particularly in 1958, I think, when President Gamal Abdel Nasser and the then president of Syria, Shukri al-Quadli, entered into what was called the United Arab Republic, which was a federation between Egypt and Syria. But within a few years, in 1961, they got out of that particular arrangement, and a series of events started taking place in Syria with coup d'etat after coup d'etat. But the entry of the Assad family, Assad first participates in a coup in the 1960s, 1966, and he becomes a defense minister at that time. And when he becomes the defense minister, Hafez al-Assad, he himself takes power in 1970 via a coup d'etat. And that is the beginning of the personality cult and the Assad regime, which has been in place for nearly 50 years. And what is critical is that Assad, of course, belonged to the Alawite sect of what is sometimes seen as part of the Shia sect. And he becomes very sectionalist in that regard in constituting his government, with the consequence that there are those who are mainstream Muslims who do not, number one, accept that the Alawites are a proper part of the Ummah, and he employs members of his family and remains in power, even in the face of several attempts at removing him from power. And of course, what happens is that he sees himself as an Arab leader of significance. And during the many battles, including the battle in 1973, when he fights with Israel, and that is when the Golan Heights are taken by Israel, which is still in the Israeli hands to date. Assad enters into a phase of being a pan-Arabist in the sense that he sponsors what are considered to be freedom-fighting organizations or outfits, but which the Western world see as terrorists. His involvement with Hezbollah, his involvement with Hamas. And he remains in power for a long time, until he dies, I think, in the year 2000. And that is when his son, Bashar al-Assad, comes to power. One would have imagined that Bashar al-Assad, who is a trained doctor who has been exposed would behave differently. But Bashar is, in the estimation of quite a number of commentators and historians, worse than the father. He is a continuation of the Assad cult and the Assad regime. And what he does is to continue the factionalism of his father, and of course his dalliance with Iran. Remember, we are operating at a time when there is a bipolar world, and there is the contestation between the Western world, the conceptual West as led by the United States of America, and of course there is the Soviet Union in those earlier days, and of course after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation. And Assad naturally allies himself with the Russian Federation and the Iranians, who are then seen to be his underwriters. And Syria literally breaks down civil war, factionalism, and Syria is seen as the breeding ground of a number of terrorist organizations on whose forehead the mark of Cain is then placed by the Western world. And during the early days, particularly when the Arab world was boiling, when the Arab Spring started in Tunisia and then it went through to Egypt, and so the departure of Hosni Mubarak, even in Syria there was unrest, but Bashar quells and quashes that unrest violently. It was bloody in Damascus, and he continues to hold on power tentatively with a lot of players. Remember that Syria then becomes the home of quite a number of these organizations, even the Kurds, who in Turkey and in Iraq find refuge in that space. So that despite the fact that the Assad regime continues to hold important cities such as Damascus, Aleppo, and Homs, there is always insurgency. And I think that what has precipitated the departure of the Assad regime in the manner that it did is that it was rotten. It had started rotting from the days of the Arab Spring. The only thing is that there were so many things happening in the Middle East that it could not be seen. And for a regime that has been in power for 50 years to collapse within 2 weeks of the emergence of the insurgency tells you how rotten it was. Despite the best intentions of the best of his backers, such as Iran and Russia, he literally had to run away. And it is instructive that the reason, in my view, why the Assad regime fell the way it did, it is very reminiscent of all these cultic and these cultic and personality-based regimes. We saw it with Jean-Claude Duvalier in Haiti, Papa Doc and Baby Doc. In North Korea, of course, it has not quite succeeded, but we have seen that whenever leadership is based on personality cult, then it begins to rot from inside. We saw that in Bokassa in Central African Republic, and there's a number of examples of this kind of individuals who destroy their countries. Because if you looked at the Assad regime since the Arab Spring, there was very little economic activity. It was a safe haven for different factions. Hezbollah has major operations in that part of the world, so that the industry that actually kept the regime alive was the war industry. And his departure is one that portends ill, in my view, for that particular region. In the short to medium term, those who have held power may appear to have succeeded, but Syria remains a powder keg. What then is the lesson that can be derived from the Assads? Although I know that history teaches us that it teaches us nothing, because these dictators come and they believe and behave as if their fate will be different. Yet history is consistent that when you get power from the barrel of the gun, you also leave power by the barrel of the gun. So there it is. Assad has sought asylum. Assad stole He ran both a kleptocratic and plutocratic regime, and is now away in Moscow. And I want to believe that there may very well be attempts by this administration to ask